ranked 1 to 10, where are we now on the AI hype scale?
It's hard to be that precise, but let me tell you what we say. We say, 2023 was the year of, experimentation, and it was really about using AI in the playground, and this is the year to use it in production. So, to your point, I think there has been a lot of hype around it. I think, unlike previous hype cycles, there's a lot of substance behind AI as well.
Yeah.
And I do believe, and we are already starting to see both at Adobe as a customer of our products, but also our customers starting to use it in their production workflows to drive a lot more personalization at scale. So it's starting to become very real in my mind.
Yes. So I was, we were chatting beforehand, and I said, aside from NVIDIA, who's actually making money out of AI applications? How do you balance? There's great sense of FOMO. Nobody wants to miss out. You've all got to be there, but at what point does the sort of investment actually turn into revenue?
Yeah, first of all, I think this is the debate that Wall Street is having. As you know, we spend a lot of time with investors, and I think the thesis is there are going to be companies that emerge that are that have created something brand new. I think OpenAI is an example like that has an opportunity. Certainly, the chip manufacturers with everything that needed to train these models are benefiting. And then companies that are benefiting from being able to take AI and actually integrate it into their workflows. And for example, what we're doing is, we've built a set of models for imaging and illustration and design. We've integrated those directly into Photoshop and Illustrator and Acrobat. And we've also launched AI services now so that people can start doing more automation at scale in their marketing organizations. And those have been relatively well monetized. We had a fairly strong earnings call last week, and we have been basically sharing that as we move down this path, we expect to see more monetization of all of this going into the back half of this year and certainly into 2025.
And just to sort of focus in on your own performance. So yes, you had the successful earnings call, but since then the stock was downgraded, right?
Not that I'm aware of. So we had the earnings call last week.
Yeah.
I think we've done quite well in that earnings call. I think we were up something like 15%.
Right.
And I think we've held pretty much. I'm looking at my comp
quickly
stream.
checking.
Did something happen last night that I'm not aware of? But no, I think it's been continuing to hold quite well. And again, it's on the back of the fact that our products are being used with AI. So for example, we just announced we've crossed 9 billion generations in the year since we launched our AI models. We have also started sharing how we're bringing third-party models into our applications, and we have a long list of partners that are interested in doing that. And again, I'll go back to Firefly Services. If you think about Adobe's historic business and media creation, it's been about using our tools. But now with automation, we get to participate more in the workflows beyond individuals using the products and really more of a platform play.
So obviously you're up against a lot of other companies that are doing similar things. You sort of touched on it, but tell me more about what really differentiates Adobe. What makes you stand out in this very sort of pretty cluttered, landscape now?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It is an important question. For that, I think taking a step back is going to be an important pathway. So about a year ago, we launched Adobe Firefly. Firefly is our generative models. It started with imaging. We then added support for illustration and vector support. We added support for design generation. We've talked about the fact that we will have video generation out later this year, 3D generation. So that set of models makes us, I think, the most complete set of creative models in the market. In addition to generating that content, there are a few things that we've done that are substantially different than others. The first is we've trained it on only data that we have full access rights to. And we are transparent about the data we train on it. So marketers and companies know that they can use it not just for ideation and inspiration, but they can actually use it in their production flows and publish content that is built with it because we can share how all of that was built. We also built it for control. So instead of being able to just generate something, you can send it a style and say, I want to match this style, and it will generate something in your brand style. You can have it match a very specific structure that you have in mind. And it's all integrated into our tools. So brands can then also customize the model on their assets and their campaign styles and use it in Photoshop or use it in Adobe Express, or as I was talking about, start using it as part of Firefly services, which is the foundation of how all of this content can now be generated at scale and through more automation as well.
So when you're talking to potential customers, or you're saying, you should use Adobe because, I mean, what's your sort of quick pitch?
The quick pitch is that your creative departments will save an enormous amount of time on the rote work and be able to focus more on the creative expression that they're so great at. And for marketers, personalization at scale is the game. How do you start to create enough content that can meet the audiences that you need to reach, with the product sets that you need to promote, with the languages and the geography and the culturalization and the audience profile? So if you do all of that, you have an enormous burden on content. I'll give you one quick example to really drive it home. We had our conference last year in October. When we announced that conference, we put together some creative content. There was about 80 pieces of creative content. By the time we had to personalize it, we had 54,000 content. And if you're a marketer in this room, I think you know exactly what I'm getting at. How do you go through that process? It takes months to create all those variations and slows you down. So now what took months can take minutes, and you can get it out much faster. And we've had IBM talk about it. Unilever has been sharing how they've been using our platform of products to accelerate how they create content. And we have just a lot of customers that have been working with us along the way.
I was also interested in what you said there about the training data that you use, and you said you're completely transparent about it. Is that different from how other companies operate in this area?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think most companies in this area are scraping the web, and they're not very forthcoming about what they're actually training their models on. We have Adobe Stock, which has been an area that contributors can contribute content, and it's a marketplace where we do revenue sharing with them. We also have a contributor fund, AI fund, so that as we train on the content, we're also paying out. And so you can literally just go to Adobe Stock and see what we've trained on.
Right. And do you train on any? I have to ask this: any sort of media brands, or
no?
You haven't done?
This is exactly the point, and this is why, frankly, media companies, we've been working with media companies in terms of using our products. This is also why a lot of enterprises are using it. If you think about companies like Paramount, they're users of Firefly. They don't want to use models that are scraping their content, and we don't do that, but we allow for customization of the model. Mm-hmm. So if there's a brand that has some content that they want a model trained on, it's very easy to do it as part of ours. So you can extend our model, but we don't train on anyone's content, and that is a key part of using that content in production, which is really what takes it out of the playground and into production.
And you're going to stick to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. That is the conversation we've had. We will always have these models that are what we refer to internally as vegan models. But we believe very strongly in that element.
So I want to ask you about the failed merger with Figma. Obviously, you were quite far down the line with the regulatory. You'd gone. I think it was 15 months in. And then, the EU, I think it was the EU and the UK authorities came out and scuppered it. What did you learn from going through that process?
I think this is one of those moments where, if we take a step back and we look at, what Figma was doing then, what they were doing as part of the process and what they're doing now, there really was no business overlap. They are very focused on an adjacent business, which is around enabling designers and developers to work together for application development. That is not what Adobe does or has done. That's not where we're going, and that's where they're continuing to double down. So I take a step back and I say, we are in an interesting era, and there's a lot of question around, how far regulators should reach. Personally, look, at the end of the day, it should not take 15 months to settle in a discussion like this. I think it's not good for the consumer, it's not good for the customer, and it's not good for innovation, right? If you can't go into these conversations. The second thing is, I do think regulators need to be a little careful about inadvertently stifling innovation. We do see a lot of conversation in venture now asking the question, if there's no off-ramp, then why should there be an on-ramp? Mm-hmm. Why should money invest in startups if the only path out is an IPO? Because regulators are leaning in so heavily around the globe. And in this context here, I think I hope it stirs a little bit of a conversation, because you can see, a year in, or 3 years since we announced, there is no overlap between the companies.
What about, was the FTC also looking at it, at the deal?
It was the DOJ.
Right, the DOJ. And what did they, once you'd abandoned it, obviously they had nothing more to say, but had you had conversations with them?
We were working with all three regulators, and the DOJ, at the end of the day, didn't come out with a position because the FTC and the CMA
preempted it. So obviously it was a big disappointment for you. How has it affected your strategy since then?
It hasn't, and that's really the point of why we were different companies and not adjacent. We have an enormously successful business focusing on the needs of marketers, creative professionals, and knowledge workers with Document Cloud and Acrobat. So it's really, if anything, focused us on that. We've doubled down on the work we're doing to develop our own models, and we've doubled down on how we're taking those models and integrating it into, as we mentioned, Photoshop and Firefly services. But we also have, we've released something called Adobe Gen Studio, which is really about a single cockpit to do everything from workflow and planning for the content you need to create and the campaigns you want to run, to creating that content, to activating that content, to measuring that content, all through one cockpit. So we're looking at ways that we can now take all of this AI innovation happening at Adobe and around the ecosystem and really enable it for marketers to start to do more personalization at scale. That's been where we've doubled down. The other thing I'll say, and you asked this a little while ago, like what takes a company that's creating AI technology and solutions and helps them make money? Well, the starting point is, do we help our customers make money? And that's really the core of what we're focused on, right? So with Photoshop, IBM came out and they talked about how 80% of a creative studio team is spent on building variants of what they create initially. That's a lot of wasted time that with AI now, the studio teams can be much more focused. They also shared, and we've seen ourselves, the ability to create more content means the ability to run more tests in market. And as we're running more tests in market, we also have the opportunity to do much faster optimization of those tests. And so we see lift in all of the campaigns that we're running because of the fact that we're using AI to accelerate that. So that's really the foundation of how do we enable organizations and marketers and solopreneurs to participate in the digital economy in a much more personalized way that ultimately drives their business. And so,
is there any more M&A activity then on the horizon?
We're always in the market, and certainly we don't anticipate another deal of that scale. That has not been sort of what's been front of mind for us. But we're always looking for things that we think that we can sort of integrate and leverage in a more active way and bring that value to our customers through our product.
So, obviously it's a nascent industry, everyone's feeling their way, and there have been other issues for Adobe, including there was some criticism recently of a recent update to your terms of service that allows Adobe access to user-generated content. I know you've since amended your terms of service, but how are you responding to criticism from creatives?
I think this is a very healthy dialogue. In fact, you've had some of these conversations earlier. Just to maybe set the context here, what we did was every couple of years we push out sort of an update to our terms of service that just educates people about changes that happen in the terms of service. This actually had people look at terms of use language that had been there for years, had been there for a long time. And I think what it shows is that in this environment, there's a heightened sensitivity around trust, around usage of the data and the ownership of the data. And the great news here was that our policies are really clear. Users own their data. We do not. We have access to that data in certain limited circumstances to either run the product, which is you can't edit a file without opening that user's file, or do certain important things like child protection, supporting child protection laws. And we never have and never will train on users' data without their explicit consent, like their submission of it to Adobe Stock for monetization and revenue share. So, updating the terms of service was an easy decision for us because it's consistent and it's very creative, creator-friendly policies that we have. But what it did show is that I think in this day and age, we have to be a lot more empathetic to how people might interpret something. And we have to be a lot more proactive about doing that. So that's a good lesson learned. And actually the terms of use are being updated later today. And we're starting to push that out across.
And presumably, the world has learned something from the initial sort of digital revolution around privacy. And so companies like yours are being much more mindful. I mean, do you think that's something that, everyone is bought into? Or do you think the debate around privacy is still a little bit kind of unsophisticated, really?
I think there's some level of nuance in how and what people try to do. So one of the things we did, just to be clear, as part of the terms of use is we actually, obviously the terms of use are written by lawyers, right? And so what we've done now is we work with our comms team and our legal team and frankly the community as well. We spent the last week talking to members of the community to actually insert English language trying to explain what the intent is. So I think the first part is transparency about what you're doing in a human readable way. You shouldn't need a law degree to understand what you're signing up for. I think that's very important. But then I agree with you. I mean, I think the conversation, there's a lot of conversation around trust, whether it's about privacy, whether it's about the authenticity of some content, and about how that content is actually being used or misused. And so, we've been on the forefront of a lot of this. Before it was in vogue to talk about it. 5 years ago, we launched something called the Content Authenticity Initiative, and that's really about content credentials. Think of it as your nutrition label for any content you look at. And the idea there is we've got it now. I think over 3,000 partners signed up to that from large media companies, including the Wall Street Journal, to camera manufacturers, social companies. And what happens is that when any content is created, whether it's taken a photo on your phone or it's edited in Photoshop or created by AI, we want these credentials inserted in so that every piece of content floating around the web has that nutrition label associated with it. And someone like the BBC, I think recently launched credentials on some of their properties. They surveyed their viewers, and the viewers responded that they trust what the BBC is posting more because of those credentials and the ability to really analyze the content.
Yeah. No, I want to talk about sort of trust and media. Yeah. Just before we get on to that, you're also a little bit in trouble for making it difficult for people to cancel. Am I right?
The U.S. federal government is alleging that, but that is we don't believe that is the case. I mean, but we moved to subscription business over 10 years ago, and the reason we moved to subscription business was first and foremost about innovation. Getting innovation out, merging what's happening in the cloud and the desktop applications is absolutely essential. And as we do that, we've been able to innovate much faster as a result of that. And for our subscription plans, we've really opted for giving a lot of variety. We have a lot of different customers coming into the plan. We have the largest brands in the world, and we have individual solopreneurs and students. And so we have a set of plans that let you focus on things like higher price, more variability, and lower commitment, and much lower price and higher commitment plans. And our obligation and our commitment has always been transparency, from the name of the plan being very clear what the plan is to all of the terms around it being elevated. So obviously we very much disagree with that, and we're going to fight it in court.
Yeah, good to hear. Yeah. Elections, misinformation, you were beginning to talk about it there. Obviously, it's a huge year for elections, not just in the US. We're in full campaign mode here in France. We've got the UK election. And it was interesting, the Reuters Institute published their annual look at trust in the media, was sort of looking at the state of the media, and it found that there's very, very widespread public suspicion about how AI might be used in reporting, particularly around really hard news events like wars, elections, and all the rest of it. You mentioned it a bit earlier, but can you talk a bit more about what you're seeing in terms of deep fakes and other fake user-generated content that is being used sort of in nefarious ways to influence campaigns? Yeah,
I mean, I think the use of it is fairly well covered. I think the question is, what should we do about it? So to your point earlier, first of all, our understanding is that more than 50% of the world's population is going to vote. I was in India a few weeks ago, and it was amazing to see how much active participation there was there, and it's a wonderful process. We all need to do it. Voting based on what we know is true is the most important thing, so that we can all make decisions on that. And so, to your point, I think what AI can enable, if done incorrectly, is accelerating the creation of misleading content, and we know that. And so I think there are a lot of things that we as an industry should be doing. So first of all, we should train. How we train is the starting point for what you get on the back end. You cannot create a Pope and a Puffy with our model because we don't train on open.
Create a what?
Pope and a Puffy. So I don't know.
A Pope and a Puffy. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Because we don't train on the open internet. We train on content that we know is relevant, right? So that's one. Two is good moderation of that content coming in, so that we are, getting ahead of anyone that's putting content in that shouldn't be there, and we have a very good moderation process, and we're always making it better. Third is, as we talked about, these content credentials. So when you see some content, you can say, this doesn't quite look right, or if I don't see the ability to look at it and understand how it was created, then maybe I should, question the origin.
Okay, so just on that point then, I get my picture of the Pope and a Puffy. Apart from the fact that it's obviously ridiculous, how do I know? How do I, as a user, establish that it's a fake?
Yeah. So with content credentials of the Authenticity Initiative, the idea is when you see an image, that image will, if it has the credentials and they've not been tampered with, it will have a little CR at the top right. Think of it as sort of a validation check mark.
Yeah.
And if you click on that CR for credentials, then you see the provenance of where that photo was taken and all the changes that were made to it. Adobe Firefly, as an example, and any edits that we make in Photoshop or any of our tools flow into those credentials, so that you can always see if something was edited in Photoshop, what it was, or you can see if it was generated with AI. And again, like I said, more and more organizations are trying to sign up for that. And one of the things that I would ask Wall Street Journal and others to do is just really start not just sort of letting us do that, but the value is when those credentials start to actually show up.
Well, I was just going to ask you, is there any evidence? What's the evidence that people are using the credentials, that they're going to them to check? Because I should know about this, but to be honest, this is the first time I knew that.
We'll follow up with the Wall Street Journal, and you guys are part of the initiative, so it'd be wonderful for you to do this. As I mentioned, some have started doing it. BBC is a good example.
And do they find that people are actually using it though? Like people who come to the BBC website are checking, or
yes, so they in fact followed up the launch with a user research,
right?
And people were coming, they were clicking on credentials tag, and they were, they said in the research that they are more comfortable with that content as a result. Now we need to see, to your point, we can, as an industry, we can create it. Adobe, I think, pioneered this 5 years ago. But we need everyone to get on board, right? Yeah. And so the more companies, and especially social media companies too, start using that credential link, it becomes an education game, right? You can go down the path of we've gone down with security software, and it's a game of whack-a-mole where you're trying to keep the bad content out and the good content in. But I believe very much that education and transparency is the best way to combat this.
So you mentioned earlier that you were in India during the election campaign there, and it was an astonishingly interesting election. But did you come across the use of, were deepfakes widespread? Was misinformation widespread? Could you give us an example of where you've seen the sort of how you're combating the misinformation? Can you give us an example either in India or somewhere else around the world where you've?
Well, I haven't seen any or read any reports. I was an observer there on the ground. I wasn't there to cover it. So I saw people coming into the office with their marker on their fingernail to show that they had voted, and it was very inspiring. I wasn't there to cover that, so I don't know what the deep fakes might have been, and or how much, if any, impact it had on the election. But what I do know is that governments around the world, including India, are very focused on making sure that this is an issue. So we've talked to the Modi administration. We're working with the White House and Congress. We're also working with the EU and the UK to try and make sure that this becomes part of the policy around content authenticity. Because until we get all of the publishers showing this and it becomes the norm, it's all an academic exercise. We made a tremendous amount of progress, but what we now need is that collective step And I do believe some governments will step in, because I don't think it's in any government's best interest to allow misinformation to.
So do you think the US election, the imminent US election, is going to play out differently perhaps than in 2016 when the really was the Wild West out there? We've come a long way since then. Do you think it's going to be more, I was going to say civil?
Civil's a big question. We'll see. That I can't speak to. I hope so. But I think the big difference is part of what we talked about. I think education and understanding is much more relevant in 2024 than it was in 2020. I think some places you go will give you that transparency, but it's not widespread enough yet to really reshape what we see. So right now, education, I hope in 2028, and we should all, take this on, and certainly even before that, because of elections around the world. I think it's our obligation as a private sector, and I think it's our obligation as a in government to safeguard this stuff. And so I'm hoping to see that in the inertia and the activation that we've seen coming up to the election, maybe a little bit now, but I hope that inertia continues after the election. We don't lose interest in it.
Great. Well, look, we've absolutely rattled through this, and you're jet lagged as well. But I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions, perhaps on the sort of brand and marketing side of things, which I haven't asked you about. I mean, obviously, you're everywhere here. What role do you think brand and marketing plays in putting forward this message that you're, particularly around this whole idea of misinformation and trust? How big a role does that play?
Yeah, I think it's important. So first of all, I think if you're in brand or marketing, at your firm, certainly I know at Adobe, it's an enormously complex job, right? I mean, the landscape to get your voice out and be heard is getting more and more complicated than it's ever been, and it's getting more competitive than it's ever been, and really, I think that the trajectory you are all on is like, how do you stand out in a sea of sameness, right? I mean, just everyone's got these interesting, exciting things. And I think the solution for that, and this is really what we've been working on with our customers, is more personalization, right? We want to give you the ability to create better and better, more relevant content than ever before. That's richer and engaging. That's what the role of Photoshop is, and Illustrator and Premiere and our creative tools. But we also want to make sure that you have the ability to start to create audience segments that you can then specialize and personalize, understanding about the audience, and then give them content that really meets their need. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, others have been doing this to sort of enable more personalization of their drinks and their bottles. We certainly see this in the consumer packaged goods, where people are trying to create more personalized packaging. We see this in healthcare, where people are trying to provide more personalized, marketing content to individuals based on their needs. And the foundation of that is to be able to create a sea of content that is personalized and rich, and then start to really activate it with those users. And that's what our solutions do. And that's why we're here with the big presence, is because we've been working with the largest brands in the world to enable that to happen.